Now we're going to divide in scientific notation. So we're going to be seeing problems like this where we have a number written in scientific notation divided by another one. We've got some summary rules here that we're going to talk about. We're going to come back to those, but just be aware we're going to want to write those down. Okay, so here we go. Let's just dive right in. There's only a couple problems we're going to do today. This is a lot like what we did when we were multiplying in scientific notation, but just a little different spin on it. But let's analyze first what is it going to look like. Now, this is the problem we saw from the previous page. This might be written in several ways. You might have it written like this, where it looks like a fraction. You might have it expanded, where you have the division symbol, or you might have somebody using a slash. Now, I will say right off the bat, avoid this notation if at all possible when you're handwriting this. Okay. Now, really, the only time you want to write it this way is if you have to type it. Okay. Right. If you're typing it into a computer, then often this is a little harder to do. There are ways to do it. I type this in a computer, but if you're sending an email or you just want to quickly write out what you're trying to do, often this is a little bit easier if you're putting it into a spreadsheet, for instance. So there are times you do this, but if you're handwriting it, avoid this, if at all possible. So let's try to avoid writing it that way if you're doing it by hand. Okay, so avoid if writing, right? If you write it by hand. Okay, so instead we're going to use this way right here. Okay, so now let's actually use that. I'm gonna rewrite it just so we've got a clean version here. Okay, I've got, again, I had 5 times 10 to the 9th divided by 2 times 10 to the 6th. Okay, now before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, let's just remind ourselves what this means, right? This is 5 with 9 zeros. This is a 2 with 6 zeros. We can also think of that as being 5 billion divided by 2 million. In other words, how many 2 millions are there in 5 billion? Okay, all right. So what we need to do then is we need to break this down into pieces. And what you're going to do is this. So like I said a second ago, right here are the procedure. This is the basic procedure when you're dividing scientific notation. First, we divide the coefficients. You can think of that as being the first factors. You're going to end up subtracting the exponents, and in the end, you might have to fix the format. Okay, so let's break this down. So I've got the coefficients. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate this out. I'm going to have coefficients, and then I'm also going to work with the powers of 10 with the exponents. So let's separate this out. So I'm going to separate this into pieces. I'm going to have 5 divided by 2, and whatever that is, I'm going to multiply that times 10 to the 9th over 10 to the 6th. Okay? In other words, I've just kind of rearranged this a little bit, but as you can see, I'm going to focus on the coefficients, the first factors, and then I'm going to focus on the powers of 10. Okay? So let's now work that out. So if I've got 5 divided by 2, well, 5 divided by 2 is just 2.5. 10 to the 9th divided by 10 to the 6th, well, remember when we divide powers, you subtract the exponents. So this is 9 minus 6, right? 9 minus 6, okay? So that becomes 2.5 times 10 to the 3rd. 10 to the 3rd, right? Now, depending on what you're doing, you might just leave it that way, okay? But then there are going to be times where maybe it makes more sense to write it out in expanded form. So you might see it this way. You might see it written as 2,500, right? Remember, you're moving this over 3 spots, the decimal point, okay? So again, if we come back to our original question, let's see. There are 2,500 2 millions in 5 billion. Okay, so that's fundamentally what we're trying to figure out. Okay, so let's move on we're just going to do 2 problems today. And then for our last problem, now we're going to look at what happens when the decimals, when the coefficients are decimals, right? You have decimal coefficients. There's decimals in the coefficients. And then what if we have negative exponents? All right, so again, we want to separate it out, okay, right? So I'm just going to focus on this part, right, the coefficients, and I'm going to separate out the second part, the exponents, okay? So let's do that. So I end up with 4.8 divided by 8, whatever that is going to be times this. Now, I could rewrite it, but, let's just jump straight to it, right? If I'm dividing, right, let me just cover this for a second, right? This is like saying 10 to the negative 9th divided by 10 to the negative 12th. Well, I'm going to subtract the bottom coefficient. So this is negative 9 minus negative 12, okay? Now, again, be very careful when you have negative exponents, right? Don't try to do too much in your head with this. Be very careful. Now, minus a negative is like plus a positive, isn't it, right? So what I end up with here is 4.8 divided by 8. Okay, 4.8 divided by 8, well, that's 0.6, right? Think about it this way, right? 8 goes into 48 6 times, but since it's 4.8, it's 0.6. Now, this is negative 9 plus 12. Well, that's like saying 12 minus 9, isn't it? So I've got 10 to the third. Now, okay, that's okay, but not a good place to stop, right? I've got 0.6 times 10 to the third. That's not correct scientific notation, is it? This decimal point needs to be over 1, right? That 6 needs to be in front. So I would move that decimal point over. Now, what just happens is this value, it was 0.6, right? It just got bigger. If this is getting bigger, well, this has to get smaller to compensate. So instead of a 3, this is a 2, okay? So my final answer would be 6 times 10 squared. Now, again, you might just stop there, and that's a good way of saying it if you want an answer in scientific notation. But I will say that, you also want to think about what, is convenient. When the exponents aren't very big, often it will make sense to just write that out as 600, right? Again, I can't give you a simple answer that you're always going to do it one way or the other, but I will tell you that there are times that, 600 in most situations makes more sense to people than 6 times 10 to the 2, right? They're both good answers, depends on the situation, but just know that there's going to be times where you want to do it one way versus the other. Okay, so let's summarize what we just did here. Again, this is the important takeaway for today. When we divide in scientific notation, we divide the coefficients, right? 4.8 divided by 8, that's 0.6. We subtracted the exponents. Negative 9 minus negative 12 was a 3, but then we fixed the format. And again, depending on what you're doing, maybe you're going to write your answer as 6 times 10 to the second power, or you might write that as 600. All right, well, thanks, guys, and enjoy the rest of your day.